I'll say okay.
So here, Tony Gonzalez from Made in Metal, and today we are talking to Paul Gilbert, who recently released a new recording called Rock. Hello, Paul. How are you?
I'm doing great. How you doing?
Perfect. And I'm really glad to be here talking to you.
I'm glad to be talking to you. Thanks for speaking English.
My English is broken, but I defend myself as a lion.
It's working for me.
Yes. Yes. So, rock was born from a book of etiquette rules from over 4 centuries ago. At what exact moment did you feel that this test was not just a historical curiosity, but the heart of your next rock album?
That question is well formed. Uh, I was flying back home. We had done a long farewell tour with Mr. Big. The last show was in Japan, and I was flying from Japan back home, which is, so I had about 10 hours on the airplane. And I was saying, well, what should I do? Mr. Big is over, and now I want to make a new solo album. And somehow that I had read this book like 25 years before. I read it a long, long time ago. Somehow it came into my head. I don't even remember how. And I thought, I wonder if I could make songs out of that. So it started kind of as a question, like, is it possible? And I had on my phone, I had AI. So I said, I didn't have the book with me. So I just said, AI, tell me a few of the rules of civility from the George Washington book. And it did. I said, well, make that into like a blues lyric. And AI did it, and I read it. And I thought, okay, well, let's make the chorus repeat a little more, and let's change the bridge. And I was just sort of having fun with AI making blues lyrics out of Washington rules. And then I got home, and I picked up the guitar, I started to sing them, and I thought, this is really interesting. I love the result. I was having a lot of fun with the process, but I thought this is a strange idea. Most rock songs are not, etiquette rules. So I thought, well, let me test that out on some people. So I had my bass player Timmer come over, and Doug Rappaport, a great guitar player that lives close by. I had him come over, and I showed them the songs. We played it a little bit, and I watched them very closely. I wanted to see, like, what are their eyes doing? Are they smiling, or are they, like, looking down at the ground in embarrassment? And they were smiling. They were digging it. So I thought, okay, well, it seems to have passed the test with at least these two guys. So we just kept rehearsing, and I kept writing new songs, and pretty soon we had the whole album.
So you say you were looking for your own Bernie topping, and then you ended with the most famous songwriter, George Washington, yes, as your lyricist.
Oh, well, I was going to say, what a good collaborator. But also, actually, George Washington didn't write the rules. They originally came from France. I think they were written in 1595, around that time, by French Jesuit scholars. And it was an etiquette manual. And then about 100 years later, it was translated to English. And then that translation made it across to America, where George Washington was a high school student, and he copied them as a penmanship exercise, to improve his handwriting. So now, of all the people involved in that story, George Washington is the most famous. So I think that's why they put his name on the book. Even though he didn't actually write them, I mean, he wrote them with his handwriting, but he didn't compose. He didn't compose the rules himself.
And was there a moment when you thought, when you were writing on the lyrics, was there a moment when you thought, this is too weird? No one is going to understand an album based on rules of civility?
Well, I really like a lot of the rules in there. So I thought, this is great. I sort of couldn't wait to share it. I thought people will enjoy it. I think there was one song that I had to do like a rewrite because my first attempt at the song, again I just put rules together. It was the song "If You Soak Bread in the Sauce," and when I first wrote it, it was different than it is now. I had a different bridge, and I was singing it, and I couldn't sing it because I was laughing so hard. Because it even though the lyrics came from here, it took on kind of a second meaning that was unintentional, and that second meaning was horrible. I was like, no, like I was again, I actually physically couldn't sing it because I was laughing so hard, and but it wasn't because it was funny. It was because it was so terrible. So I decided, like, okay, maybe I just have to throw the whole song away. But then I thought, well, I love the beginning, so I rewrote the bridge, and then it was fine. Then it sort of became the original meaning that was intended, and I saved the song. But that was really the only time when I had any doubt.
Rock is your first vocal album since 2016. 10 years without singing in your own recordings. What made you feel that this particular concept deserved the extra effort of singing again and not just sticking to an instrumental album?
Yeah. Well, I had done a lot of singing on the Mr. Big farewell tour, both singing harmonies, and during the sound check I would often sing the lead vocal for a song or two, because a lot of times Eric was saving his voice for the show, and so before Eric came out, I'd sing a song with the band, and I was having a good time. I'm singing this big theater, and it sounded pretty good, so it gave me my confidence as a singer back. And also when I wrote these songs, I wrote them to fit my voice, so I could choose the key, and I could make it so it's very, very singable for me.
When we were talking about George Washington and the book, I have an idea. The song title, "Keep Your Feet Firm and Even," sound almost like a Masonic principle. Were you aware of George Washington's Masonic background and that of other founding fathers?
I didn't know about that. I mean, to me, the riff almost sounds like it could be a Queensryche song or something. But that one, it's funny. As soon as you said it, I thought, well, what are my feet doing right now? And they're not firm and even. So I need to work on that rule.
Yes. And tell me, Paul, was there a rule you love as an idea, but does exist behind turned into a song? Something that you read and you like it, but it's not a song?
The rules of me are interesting. When I first read them, like 25 years ago, I remember thinking, like, oh, rules of civility, I'll be able to follow these. I'm a civil person. And a lot of them, when I read them for the first time, I thought, that's not going to be easy. And some of the rules are about, like, gossiping. For example, speak not evil of the absent. That's hard to do. It can be fun to talk about people behind their back, and so, but I think it's also, that's a good rule. It's probably not so good to do that. And another one that is a similar idea is show not yourself glad at the misfortune of another.
Yes.
And if someone that you don't like, something bad happens to them, it's hard. Sometimes that cheers you up, and it's like, and it makes you think about it. Like, is that really good that I feel bad that something, or feel good that something bad happened to someone? So I like that thought process of taking this thing that you naturally can feel and think, like, oh, maybe I need to change that about myself. I would be a better person if I could,
For sure. Yes. So I was reading, and there are some ideas that if you practice today, I don't know the rest, but you will be a better person.
Yeah. Well, that's I mean, to me, for this album, my number one priority is actually musical. I want to have good melodies, and cool chords and good songs and rock guitar and cool solos, and but I also like, I think the lyrics are inspiring and or just interesting. To me, it's interesting to travel back in time. For example, one of the things that I first really caught my attention was the line "spit not in the fire," because that's like, to me, really takes you back in time, because you know we're not around fire a lot these days. If you want to heat up your house or your apartment, you usually don't light a fire. You just you press the button on the wall. But back in those days, you'd light a fire, and so there's probably a lot more fires, and then people spitting in them. I mean, it must have been enough spitting where someone had to make a rule about it. So that to me is an interesting journey back in time to see, what was, and one of them was, if you soak bread in the sauce, let it be no more than you put on your knife at a time. So people are eating bread with a knife, and that's different. People don't eat bread with a knife anymore. You use a fork or their hand, and those, it may seem like an unimportant thing, but it's interesting, to see how things are different.
Now that you mentioned the music, in Keep Your Feet First and Even, you start with a vocal melody and end with a metal riff that has that crazy train feel in its no choice. How do you transition from an almost bare vocal line to a complex web of riff and harmonies?
I like that, the balance of repetition and surprise. So to me, both of those things are important. When you write a song, you have to have some repetition, because you have to convince the listener to trust you. If it's just all new material, it's overwhelming. So you have to sort of, because in a way, when you write a song, you're teaching the song, and what the way you teach is repetition. So you repeat the music a little bit, you repeat the lyric a little bit, but then if you do it too much, it gets boring. So you as a songwriter, you have to decide, okay, when is the right place for the surprise? Because I need to repeat, repeat, repeat. Okay, that's enough. Now something different. And then what is it? Is it going to be a different, in the chord or the melody or the rhythm or the dynamics? Is it going to get quiet or loud? And so that, as a songwriter, that's your goal, is to both teach with repetition and also keep people interested with surprises.
Another song, interesting, is Conscious is the most certain judge, because it has a simple chord but wild modulation and surprises. Do you feel free today to make a song seems simple on the surface, even if it's full of harmonic tricks underneath?
Well, I love. I mean, when people listen to music, they all listen for different things. Some people, their favorite thing is the texture. If the guitar sounds a certain way, as a certain tone, they just love it. I was like that when I was a teenager. When I was a teenager, if I heard it like a big distorted guitar, like a Black Sabbath song, I would love it almost no matter what. I just love that sound so much. But these days, I really love melody, and I love chords, and I love interesting song structure. So those were kind of my priorities for this. And a song like "Conscience is the Most Certain Judge," I mean, actually the chords in the verse are very similar to Pachelbel's Canon, which is a classical piece. But then when it gets to the chorus, there's this rhythmic skip that I had to do, because that's how the lyrics made me do it, and it's very surprising, because it's going along, very da da da. Da, 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 ba, 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 ba. Out of nowhere, it's almost like you hit a bump in the car. The car is going along smoothly, and all of a sudden, boom! You hit a big bump. But when you hear it, you realize, like, oh, that actually fits. And so to me, that's the surprise, and that becomes the hook. That makes that song different than any other song, because it has that part in it. So it makes it unique.
Paul, the lyrics made me do it is a sentence that is worthless. Yeah,
Yeah.
let me do it. Yes, in Go, Not Thither, vibrato coexists with a royal atmosphere, classic metal riff, CC top style boogie. Do you first think about the listener's journey, or do you simply follow your curiosity and then trust that your personality will glue all together?
That was funny because that's probably the song that's going to be the most popular on the record. It was the first single, and people responded really well to it. And I'm guessing that's going to be the standout track. But when I first wrote it, I almost didn't put it on the album
Oh,
because the riff, I thought like, well, it's not that melodic. It's just sort of like, it's a good rock riff, but it wasn't like as melodic as some of the other things. Like a song like Orderly and Distinctly has a lot. The melody is a lot more adventurous. So going up to I thought like, oh, it's okay, but as I didn't have when the first bit of it was just a short, like only the chorus. I just had go I was like, I just had that short little bit. So the trick was to develop it, to come up with to expand it, come up with more of the song, and finally, that took a little more work, and I developed it and I put the melody in. Like to me, actually, the guitar solo is one of the more melodic parts of it. It's got a really cool change where it sort of goes from major to minor, and it's really fun to improvise. That's because a lot of the guitar solos on the record are kind of worked out, and I play the vocal melody on guitar. But I think Go Not Thither is where I get to improvise almost more than any other of the songs, and it's both challenging and really enjoyable.
the some songs look like simple, but they aren't. For this reason, I would like to ask you, is there a song in this recording that you consider your own little private laboratory in terms that something that you put something in the song that probably only other musicians notice, but the simple listener not?
Yeah. Well, of course, I have the good fortune to have a lot of musicians who listen to my music. And musicians are great fans because they listen really closely to the details. And musicians are also a great audience live because they don't really get into trouble. They won't start fighting, and they won't, break things or have because they want to listen to the music. They're there to enjoy it. So I love, and plus I'm a musician, so it's kind of those are my people. That's my group. And so certainly, if I do something that's a little more sophisticated musically, I know that musicians will be paying closer attention. Uh, but I think I really try to balance the parts that are like, guitar technique with songwriting and with melodies and have all those things together. Uh, but I think for me, one of the challenges that I really enjoy is slide playing. And for example, on "If You Soak Bread in the Sauce," I mean, when you first hear that, you might think, "Oh, that's just a simple pop song," but in the solo, I'm playing a pretty fast melodic solo on the slide, and that's I've practiced a lot, so I can do it, but that's a real challenge.
Yes. Yes. So you have mentioned Burt Bacharach, Todd Rundgren, the Beatles, Black Sabbath, and Iron Maiden as part of rock's DNA. How did you work to make those references coexist without the result sounding like a collage of style?
Well, to me, all those artists are great songwriters, um, and I love them all, and so that's the thing is I try not to let style get in the way of the love of music. I mean, it was funny because as a kid, my dad, he was really into rock and roll. Actually, my dad also listened to classical music a lot, but I knew that he was a little bit like if there was any music that was sort of too careful, for example, like he would hear Steely Dan and he would go like, Steely Dan, it's not really rock and roll, because it's because it sounded like the musicians were being careful, and I think my dad liked just musicians were kind of going crazy and rocking out, and so I really I grew up with that, so I remember I had an album by the Carpenters which I loved. And if my dad was home, I would never play that album. I think like, oh, that's kind of careful music. And it's funny, like before I did this album, I wrote down on my like goals, and I put listen to the Sex Pistols, because to me the Sex Pistols are a band that is not careful, and I love them. And certainly my music has more guitar solos and more things that have where I'm painting with a smaller brush, but I don't want to forget the big brush. I want to paint with the big brush as much as possible, because it's you can see it from a distance. It has a good emotion to it.
This recording was done at the Hallowed Halls in Portland, and I read that it was made in 4 days. So what risk do you take, and what magic do you gain when you decide to record an album so quickly and organically?
Well, you have to rehearse a lot, which to me is really good. I mean, there's definitely, I've done a lot of albums where I don't rehearse and I just overdub until I get it right. And but if you rehearse a lot, then the music is really inside of you, and also the flow from part to part is just more natural. And plus I can get videos for it then, because we shot video of the whole session. Every song on the record, we have the live video. I think three of them are already released. And so I'm really excited about that, because that's a great way to enjoy the music, is to actually see the real recording session. And I went back afterwards and I re-sang the lead vocal, because even though I was singing, I knew I could do better if I had some more chances. But all the guitar solos are live, and it just has a great energy that way. And also you can tell if it's a good take. If you're overdubbing, sometimes you don't really know what it's going to be until you're all finished with it, and and then it's too painful to go back and do it again. But if you're doing live, then if you listen to it, you go like, oh, that's. If it's not right, it's no problem to do it again. So you can do 5 takes of a song, and then okay, now we got it. And you really know, because you can hear everything finished.
I imagine that you bring Nick DeVirgilio here because you were playing together in Mr. Big. So, but tell me, how was the symphony, the mix with Nick DeVirgilio, the relationship?
Well, it was great having Nick come in and play drums. But the interesting thing was, Timmer on bass and Doug on guitar. They live close to me, so we could rehearse a lot before the record. But Nick lives kind of in a different state, so I would just send him the demos, and I was playing drums in the demos, so he gets an idea of what I'm looking for. And then he didn't come until the first day in the studio. So we basically had 0 rehearsal with Nick. And I know Nick is amazing, and so I knew it was going to work, but at the same time, with no rehearsal, I was a little nervous. but he sat down, played the first song perfectly. Oh, this is going to be really good. So and he did. It was a great decision using Nick. He played perfectly.
Were there any takes or studio moments where you thought, this is too perfect, let's do it again to take more risk?
No, there's different things you're looking for. Of course, you don't want any bad notes. If there's a really bad note, you probably want to fix it. And you want a good energy. You want it to feel natural, and you just want it to be, when you listen to it, it feels good. And so again, from playing live, and we can fix stuff. I mean, for example, on the opening track, "Keep Your Feet firm and even. That's a really difficult guitar solo for me. So once we got a really good take and it was like, okay, we played the song, it sounds great. But I thought, I wish I could do a better guitar solo. So normally you go back and you just overdub. But I said, no, I don't want to overdub it. So the whole band, we're gonna get together and we'll just play the guitar solo over and over again, maybe 5 times until I get one that I feel is good. And then we'll have the engineer fly that in. So it's still, the solo is still live with the band, still works for the video. I mean, the video engineer has to edit it, but a lot of times if there was a part that's like, oh, the whole song is great, but there's one little part we want to fix, we rarely overdub it. We usually, do all the fixes as a band.
Now that you tell me this, Paul, when you hear the final mix of rock for the first time, were there any track that surprised you because sounded bigger or different from what you imagined while composing them?
Oh my goodness! Well, it all sounded so good because, of course, all these songs, I had my book, and I had the acoustic guitar, because I wasn't, I just wanted to have a melody in the chords, and so I'm kind of by myself, just singing softly, and so in a way, every song kind of started as an acoustic ballad, and so to hear like the big version with the double guitars and the rocking drums and the harmonies, it sounded so much more. I mean, I wanted it to be exciting. That was my goal. But sometimes when I'm by myself in my studio playing acoustic guitar, I think like, how am I going to do that? It almost feels like, how am I ever going to lift that big weight in the air? I don't know if my muscles are strong enough. But I think when you have a band, that gives you so much energy because it's not one person; it's 4 people, and we give each other energy.
For this recording, what kind of equipment did you use? Did you use a lot of a guitar and amplifier or a simple gear?
Yeah, I mean, I've got a big guitar collection, so I like bringing a lot of guitars.
Yeah.
And it was nice to have different sounds. Like I have a vintage Ibanez double neck with a 12 string, and that 12 string, when I run it through a clean sound, is so nice for some of the pop stuff. And then of course I can switch over to the 6 string for the solos. And then I had some of my new models, like the Ibanez PGM 50 and the Ibanez FRM 350, and some vintage Ibanez stuff, like my vintage Iceman and a vintage RS 530, I think it was. That has got a whammy bar, so I used that for the whammy songs. And I had a brand new Ibanez from the custom shop. It's like a bright pink PGM. And I think maybe the most interesting thing was I had 3 amps, and one of them is right in front of me, almost like a monitor. And I like that because I don't have to have it that loud, but it because it's so close to me, I can hear it really well. And also, like, if I need some feedback, it just hits the strings directly. So it gives me that good live feedback kind of sound. And then I've got another amp that's running to an isolation speaker. So that's like inside of a box, and I can have that loud and it won't leak into the drums. And then I had the third amp, I had a switch so I can turn it on just for the solos. And of course it's an album, so the mixing engineer, if I need to be louder, he can just do it with the fader. But I really wanted to feel it live. So when I hit the button and that extra amp turns on, it feels like a solo in the room. And to me that was important. It's just like I want it to sound right. Not I don't want it to sound right later. I want it to sound right now.
In Razer X, you took the guitar to an extreme level of technical metal. In Mr. Big, to the pop rock songs that fills arenas. And what aspect of each of those phases are present in the Paul Gilbert who create rock?
Well, I think both of them. There's a lot of different styles. There's some things that are like metal riffs. There's some pure pop. There's some blues. There's some fusion. There's a couple jazz pop chords. Of course, a lot of vocal harmonies. And yeah, I don't I don't really think about it that much. I follow the melody and and then build everything else around it. Uh, and it's funny. Like when I think about my guitar playing, I'll often think about really small details. Like there's one lick that I've discovered, way after Racer X and Mr. Big, but it's really useful for a lot of the solos on the rock album. It's just this particular set of four notes, and I have a way of playing it that's pretty unique. And it's like like the solo one. If you put bread on the sauce, or if you soak bread on the sauce, at the very end, I'm going blah, 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 blah. That lick is like I've never heard anybody else do it, and so that's like my little signature. And it's such a small thing, but since I'm a guitar player, I'm aware of those small things.
You have said that you are very excited to play this material live and see how people receive it. What adjustment have you had to make to your live show to insert this song in a rock set?
Well, I'm putting together the set list now, and it's one of the things that I do is I know that people want to hear the music that they're familiar with. If there's a song that people love, they want to hear it, and so sometimes I'll solve that by making a medley. Actually a tour that I did about almost 10 years ago. I put together this medley of like Racer X songs, Mr. Big songs, my own stuff, really a long, amazing medley. And I'm putting another one of those together, with different stuff. So I just want to, make sure that everybody can hear a bit of what they came to hear. And because it's a medley, it shortens it, and that gives me time to put some of the new stuff in. And, in a way, the thing that I worry about is that I give so much music that people just it'll be too much, like almost like if you're serving a meal at a restaurant and you just put too much food, because even if it's good, it's like I can only eat so much. I'll come back tomorrow. So I have to be careful with that, because I always want to give, and sometimes I worry like, oh, that might be, people might have to just leave, like okay, I've heard enough, I'll come back tomorrow.
Perfect, Paul. Those were my questions. Thank you very much for your time. I always enjoy talking to you.
Oh, great to see you. Thank you so much. Hope to see you in Spain.
Bye bye. I hope to see you one day here in Madrid. Bye.
Bye bye.